Hi all, welcome for today's roundtable hosted by the IREB Community in Poland. My name is Sten Bühne, I'm the Managing Director of IREB and I'm happy to be the moderator of today's session together with Sylvia and Carolina. Today we are talking about documentation in the wider sense, and documentation quite often has a kind of bad reputation, so it's kind of seen as a hassle, time-consuming, unnecessary, but being honest, in reality, it's quite often underrated. And I think especially in business, for business continuity, for product quality, and for collaboration, a kind of documentation is especially needed. And together with Carolina and Sylvia, today I would like to explore what good documentation really looks like and why it is important. So welcome once again, Carolina and Sylvia. And maybe let's start with a short introduction of yourself, handing over shortly to Sylvia.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Sylwia Kopczyńska. I am a software engineer who is really passionate about building software systems and also about investigating some software engineering problems. And for this reason, I'm also a researcher working at Poznań University of Technology and trying to solve challenges concerning requirements, especially those more difficult and usually omitted requirements, so non-functional requirements that concern security, performance, usability, and so on. And also nowadays investigating how to elicit better requirements, how to have better requirements with the usage of artificial intelligence. I've gained my experience working on different projects in different domains, especially as a backend engineer and requirements engineer or product owner. So hello, and let's talk about documentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Sylvia. Handing over to Carolina.
Hi guys, my name is Karolina Zmitrowicz, and opposite to Sylvia, I have nothing to do with the backend. I'm not a software engineer. I'm a business analyst with some quality management background. So I am rather at higher level of the discipline, involved also in requirements elicitation, requirements documentation, specification, but also process modeling and this kind of stuff. And also I totally agree with Sylvia in terms of non-functional requirements or quality requirements, that they are very often forgotten. Yeah, so that's one of the challenges in our domain. And what can I say? I'm involved in IREB, specifically in IREB local community. And I represent, let me call it like that, different domains and different areas because I used to work with different customers and different projects. So I hope that my experience is allowing me to draw some conclusions that probably will be helpful. Okay, so thank you. That's all.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. And I think I'm really enjoying this discussion today because in my previous years when I've been working in industry as well, also documentation was quite often a point of discussion, and that's why I'm happy to share also your insights with your community. And I think that's what we are living for, as mentioned in the very beginning. So this is hosted by the Community Poland. We have different communities worldwide by now, and what we would like to have is a kind of network and sharing of experiences within the different communities. And this could be online, this could be on-site. I will tell a bit about on-site event, a planned one in the very end. So, but let's start and focus now on the aspect of documentation. Maybe one last organizational aspect. This live stream is recorded as well. This means you could also view this session later on YouTube and on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, please use the chat functionality. and then these questions will pop up on my desk, and I can moderate your questions directly to the team that we could answer your questions if you have any. But let's start with a kind of kickoff questions for the two of you. So what does good documentation mean to you, and especially when it comes to kind of business continuity? So who wants to start?
Sylvia, maybe.
What does it mean? So when you invited me for this talk, I started to think about documentation. And this is the kind of product that we developed in software projects that usually is not as exciting as the product, the software or a hardware product that is the main thing that we push to users and so on, that somebody can use, and then we are exciting and even more motivated to have it. However, documentation has its value, and it usually has its like pros and cons, and is perceived as something that is difficult to create because you don't see this value. Your client usually does not pay you for the documentation, but it has some, I would say, hidden value in order to have this project run smoothly and run through without no failures and so on. So documentation in like the early stages or early days of software projects was very, very important, and everybody was doing a very thick documents. And when I was studying and I was like learning about those different approaches, and I've seen tons of documentation, then I was also scared about that. But then I would say the agile movement came, and then they said that this kind of thick documentation does not have value if it's done like only for the purpose of documentation. And then they said in their in Agile manifesto that working software is more important over comprehensive documentation. And it is important to state that there is, this kind of word very important that they said comprehensive documentation. But more people, because they didn't like the documentation, they understood it, okay, so working software over documentation. And then everybody said, okay, so maybe documentation is not of the value, and you can do it your project your way without the documentation, which was a kind of misunderstanding of what Agile movement said. So this is kind of, to have the kind of balance, because neither this thick approach is okay, nor the misunderstanding of no documentation is not okay. But the documentation is to support our business. So to help us to understand better what we are doing, to pass the knowledge, because we have to remember that we are working in teams, right? So when we are working in teams, we have to share the knowledge, and those projects also last, right? So if they last and we need to share the knowledge, so we need to document some knowledge that would allow us to run the project from the end, from the beginning to the end, and support our tasks, what we are doing. So the most important thing, in my opinion, is not to go for this, either one hand or the other, but to find the balance and to find this sweet point where you are really working and you are needing it. And to define this kind of point, that is the challenge that every project has. And I think we will talk about it later in detail, how to find this project. But the most important is to find what are the tasks and how can we support it, what we need in these tasks.
Great. Thank you, Sylvia. Carolina, anything to add?
From my perspective, in very simple words, good documentation is documentation that is useful, and that's a kind of obvious, but it's useful right now and in the future, and we are forgetting about the future, and that's the point. The point. But as Sylvia said, I think that we will go into details in a few moments. Just one thing that I would really like to stress: documentation should not be done for the sake of documentation, but documentation is just to keep the knowledge, know-how in the organization. People are changing, Sometimes you are working with people, sometimes those people leave. And documentation is to provide stable source of information how the organization is running. You are finishing the project, and what? And sometimes you have no clue how the system is built. So in few years, you will really have a problem with that.
Yeah, and this is more true. So when we're looking, let's say, to years ago, so we have this issue since years that also in a kind of plan-based approaches, people did not really document what has been required, what has been changed, what has been updated in running software. And people leave, and then you have this problem of refactoring and, let's say, guessing what kind of functionality is there. Mm-hmm. And in my perception, then I was a bit smiling when Sylvia, you talked about when it comes to Agile, many people just thought, hey, there's no documentation needed anymore, here you are, get rid of this. And this is even more problematic because even in this kind of, let's say, Agile teams, people change quite more often than maybe this has been done in previous ages. And especially there, I think a kind of documentation is really needed. But let's look a bit more into practical aspects, Carolina. So when looking to your work, I'm also working not only as a trainer, but also in the area of consultancy. And so how often do you see that, especially in organizations, they see documentation as just a kind of, let's say, bureaucracy, or let's say things that is overloaded in the process? And how do you handle this?
How often?
Yeah.
Too often. I would say that it's. I do not have any strict statistic, but I think that 80% of organizations, of teams, are perceiving documentation like a waste, like someone forced me to do the documentation. They do not see and do not understand any value. And you know what's the problem? When you try to connect some dots, and you will take the documentation, you will also take Agile, that appears that you are perfectly able to build great software without any documentation. You are able to do, but you will not be able to maintain. And these are the things that people are forgotten. And quite often, I would say too often, my role as a consultant is to try to fix that situation when your business processes are not really working and the customer, the company is aware that something is wrong, but they do not know what's wrong. So we are looking into the processes. But to look into that processes, you should know, or you should have at least some documentation or people who know the process. So we have two scenarios. Either you have documentation that is typically not valid and not complete, so you don't have documentation, or you have people that claim they know. When you're trying to interview these people, it appears that they think they know how the processes are operating. And when you interview two people, you will get three different versions of the same answer in the process. And you have no benchmark. You don't have any single point of reference how these processes were redesigned. So instead of improving anything, you need to start from the beginning. Either you are improving crap, which is not really funny to improve the chaos, or you are trying to establish the processes from scratch. Double work. And you need also to remember that the organization is running. You cannot stop the organization because we want to reorganize the processes. The organization is running, and you have no clue how the organization is running. And you could ask, okay, that's not a problem of documentation. This is the problem of processes that are poorly designed. Yes, but if you will look into the reasons of poor design processes, very often they are designed as they are designed because it was not documented. Someone said that we will work like that. Then someone new came and changed it. And within the time, you're just forgetting what was the reason of change, and how the current system process, and it really doesn't matter what we are talking about, how it is working.
True, absolutely. And I think this is one of the major pain points that we are facing, especially also in our role. It doesn't matter if we call us requirements engineers, business analysts, or whomever, everyone who has to document. When looking to, I mean, you mentioned one interesting thing in my perception, that the documentation is seen as that's kind of bureaucracy. But on the other hand, let's have a look on, let's say, doesn't matter if you call this project or meetings, whatever. The issue is creating a kind of shared understanding between people. For sure, this could also happen in a meeting. This could happen in a, let's say, kind of meeting, in a planning meeting in Agile. And but quite often people are talking in a meeting about certain things, and they all think they have understood what they talked about. Then they leave the room, and everyone means something different. And especially here, when someone is taking the whatever 5-10 minutes to document also this kind of meeting minutes, for this kind of, let's say, recap of what has been discussed, and also that's when we talk about requirements, documenting what has been understood, what the system should do. This quite often then comes to the point where we see, oh, that was not what we have meant. And this is for me also a part of shared understanding that should be created. There are some questions popping in. I will, but let us shortly discuss from a research perspective this aspect. So, is there any thing, Sylvia, when looking to the research perspective, are there any studies or let's say figures when looking to, let's say, documentation, especially the long-term success of for a system when documentation is required?
The documentation confirms the experience of Karolina, especially what she highlighted in her first answer to the first question and answer to this question about the maintenance. And in my opinion, from my perspective, from my experience, also the value of the documentation is in maintenance, in documenting as for the maintenance, because the studies, they proved that in projects where you have documentation, then you have of about 20% lower time for maintenance than in the projects without documentation. So here is the number. Maybe it's not big, maybe it is big for some projects. So this is to your thing. So this is for sure, the studies confirm that for maintenance, it speeds up. Then there are also studies that say about knowledge transfer that also Karolina mentioned. And then they also confirm that when you have your documentation, then this onboarding and passing the knowledge is also faster, and new team members can faster start to work and start to do their tasks. Also, the research says about the architecture. So some researchers identified that when you record architectural decisions, so-called ADRs, it is very, very important for the success of the project. So there are some studies that document it. Of course, this is kind of difficult to measure about the impact of the documentation. And having also in mind that we are in the requirements engineering community, I looked also at some results of the survey that was recently conducted from my colleagues from the NAPIRE. And then they found that in terms of in the area of requirements, people say that they use the documentation and documented requirements in 82% of projects or product development teams as a basis for implementation. So this is the way that they pass the knowledge from the requirements engineers, from those that design the system, to those that implement it. Then documentation of requirements is needed to create tests in 60% of projects. And what is very also interesting is that requirements are also source of your contract. And this is very, very nice, because in about 30% of projects, this is part of your contract, and everybody knows how fragile contracts are, right? So for sure, Carolina will can tell a lot of stories about when you have contract and then when are some misunderstandings or some missing requirements and some ambiguities in that. And when the budget and money comes into place, then those documented requirements can work as our insurance. And this is the kind of thing that I think this is a good metaphor for documentation, because you don't need it when everything goes along. You have the same team all the time. Everybody talks to each other and everybody is working and But when something happens, when the risk mitigates, then this kind of documentation can work as your insurance, and you can look at it, you can see, okay, today we talked about this and decision was like that, and we have written that because our minds are really fragile to time. So this is some studies also prove that documentation is really important.
Great, yeah, that's super interesting. And just that the question coming in is fitting a bit into this point, maybe also to something that we're discussing about later, but I would like to share this question directly with you. And because it's quite interesting and also showing, let's say, the both sides of the medal. For sure, I feel the greater cost and lack of documentation is having the documentation that's incorrect or misleading. True. Incorrect materials can waste valuable time, create confusion, and lead to poor decisions. So I think that's completely fine. And it goes a bit further. I think it's not visible here. I'm curious to hear from you, what are the best practices to ensure that documents are in, let's say, a good quality and setting clear standards? And it goes a bit into this direction for me. How much documentation is needed, and how much documentation is to be considered? Do you have any ideas on that?
I could start if I can. The first thing, well, yeah, that's absolutely true. For me, it's easier to do not have any documentation than to have misleading documentation, because in this case, you will never know that you have misleading documentation. So, yeah, that's absolutely true. And regarding your question, which level of documentation is sufficient? Sorry, but I cannot give you any answer, because it all depends on the organization of people working, culture working, and first of all, from my point of view, the purpose of documentation. What do you want to document? Yeah, and that is a thing that I think that we are very often forgetting. What is the purpose of your documentation? Because we are not paid just to document things, everything. Yeah, documentation needs to serve some purpose. If you don't understand the purpose, for me, there is no chance to create a good documentation. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that you want to document something in the project. Yes, typical, just common IT project. What documentation you will create? I have no clue. Why? Because I don't know what is the purpose. If your purpose is just to, complete the contract, Sylvia, yeah, and just to create the software, it will be completely different purpose. If your purpose is to create a documentation that will serve the team and people who will maintain the software in 2 years from now, that's also a different purpose. And how to deal with that? For me, the first thing is to understand what are the goals of documentation, then who are the audience, the people who will use the documentation. And then if you know the audience, you will just ask those people what they need. It's simple. I don't know what programmer needs from me. I do not know senior management will need from me. I have no clue. I can suggest, but if I will not ask them, then I don't know. What is needed to create the software? What is needed to create the test? Yeah. What is needed to make business decision? I don't know. So we are asking. And on that basis, I can create template. I can consult template with the audience, and then we can try.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Sylvia, do you want to add something in this?
So I will allow to add something. So the first is that yes, you are right, and that poor or outdated documentation is worse than having no documentation. So I fully agree with Carolina with her answer, and it's even proved also in the studies. I wanted to mention it a little bit earlier when we will talk about some failures, but let's now go to it. And also some researchers, they said that they observed that there's higher number of bugs that is introduced if you have outdated documentation, and also it slows down the releases. So this is the thing. And I also fully agree with Carolina that first, when you that documentation, what the techniques. This is the kind of answer to the question that was asked. First, the technique is that you need to treat your documentation as a product. Like in Prince2, you have two types of product. You have technical products and you have management products. So you have to treat your documentation as a product. And this is part of your software, even in all the definitions that you will find in IEEE and ISO and so on. You will find that software is not just the code, the source code, but it's code with all the documentation, with the data that is something. So the software that we are building. So first, treat your documentation as your product. When you treat it as your product, you will go through the tips that Carolina said, that you need to identify who is your stakeholder for that, what kind of information do they need, and so on. At the beginning, usually we are doing a kind of communication strategy in the projects where you identify who is the person who needs to get to receive the information. In terms of management of the project, so how the process is going on, because documentation also describes this, and about the product, how you document the product, so for who you are doing it, and what they need, what kind of information do they need in order to answer this kind of idea. So this is the tip to follow and to have it. The second thing I would say is in order not to have this outdated documentation, is to have always in mind that you need to update. And one of the practice that is used in Agile, for example, is definition of done. So you put information that in order to say that my sprint, my increment is done, we can concern as a team it as done, then we need to really update the documentation, and you have it like clearly expressed in definition of done. So this is also the thing. And the technique that also comes to my mind is about the definition of ready, that is also from Agile, that is a contract between the product owner and the team of, for example, how they want to have their requirements to be documented. And then when the requirements are documented at the level that the team can understand that, so this is the kind of contract, they can start the planning. So here you can clearly express what are the needs for the product owner and for the team. So how to express it. And I would put attention to those techniques and also to move them to all aspects where you have the documents.
Yeah, great, thank you. Here's just coming up another question. It's somehow related. And so Stefan is asking, or also telling that he also needs to discuss quite often with his supervisors how much documentation is useful and adding kind of value. And for him, he is just mentioning that, especially when convincing these people, it's more the argument of, let's say, added value on a monetary aspect that it needs to be considered. I think, at least from my side, but we can discuss this as well. I'm not sure if monetary value is the only thing, because what you also need to understand is, so we are documenting requirements on the whatever level that is needed, because we want to have our, let's say, shared understanding with all the people involved. We are trying to enable people to build the right solution in the end. And what we are doing is also to, in general, to reduce the risk that something will be built that's not meeting the requirements, or let's say that's not solving the problem that was initially there. And I think this is also something that's on top of the, let's say, monetary value that should be considered. I'm not sure what's your opinion on this.
I fully agree, and that you have the qualities that you have to put into account, but also the things, Stan, that you mentioned about the risks, right? You always do the risk analysis, and you have the risks that you can list. You can take those risks from the research that I mentioned, that what poor documentation can lead to. You can take the research that says about 20% lower maintenance time. You can look at different failures that happen because of vague documentation, unambiguous documentation. You can look into the service, because they are. If you, the person who is asking the question, if you need those research, I can send you, so you can reach me out after this session. And you can take those things and then calculate how much, if your management needs, numbers, then you can calculate what is the cost of repairing a bug in your system. You can cost what is the bug of releasing a bug to your customer, so losing your customer. So those things can be estimated, and then you can like maybe not equally put it, but you can put some estimate for those risks, how much they can cost you. And on the other hand, for the creating the documentation, you can also have the numbers that you spend on. You can ask your team members to record the time spent on each task, and especially on documentation, and see what is the cost. Because of course it is not like that we should avoid calculating the cost of the documentation, because we can go like wanting to have the mitigation strategy for not failing with the project. We can go for over documentation, so we have to monitor it if it's not taking too much time. So I would say it is quite not maybe easy, but it is possible to estimate it and to put also the numbers.
What I have often used also when talking to, let's say, business people, asking them the question, what is important for you that should not be decided by someone else? Because if you leave the freedom, or if you leave these requirements too vague and too open, and this is decided, because at one point in time you need to be concrete. So that's even the software architect, the developer, who decides in which direction to go. And if there is, let's say, the people who, if you say this is something that's super important for me, how whatever the checkout process is in the shop, or how the products can be selected, what kind of data is shown for an existing customer in a whatever telecommunication retail store. If you have concrete, let's say, requirements, and if you have concrete aspects that are needed in your process, then be as precise as possible, because otherwise you do not know what you will get in the end. So it's at least a kind of rule of thumb, but this is not, for sure, not, let's say, giving the right balance. Carolina, I'm looking to you, especially with your experience in, let's say, different organizations and companies. So what types of documentation do you use, and how do you manage this kind of leveling on the right point of detail?
What kind of documentation? Difficult to answer, because I am working in different roles. So just for example, when I am in charge of improving some processes, for sure we need to have documentation of the processes, but also information, what's the strategy of the organization and what they are providing here, what value, what services. And, I'm laughing because, Sylvia, you mentioned something that I absolutely understand that should be a standard risk analysis, that should be a standard, visible or present everywhere, and it's not, unfortunately. And let me give you a short story. Some time ago, I was working for a company, a big company, global company, really, really known. They wanted to improve some processes, some software development processes, to be clear. And why? Because they felt and they knew that they are developing something bad, something not really needed, something that the customers are complaining. So that the problem was identified. And we started to looking into the development process, how they are developing, on which basis, and so on. And you know what appears? That something like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they used to have some ladies that were perfectly aware of the business processes. They know exactly which processes the software should support. And they just transfer this information in a form of requirements, in a form of Excel file, and so on. So the development team, you're laughing, you know what is the end of the story. I know. So they created an Excel list, they passed to development. Development, of course, they guessed a little bit what's the story behind, but they created something. And then they started to maintain and improve or change the application so that it will be bigger, that it will support more and more and more operations. And they started to implement operations that were not in the initial scope, and everything started to break. And the development team was blamed because, IT guys are not supporting business. They are creating crap and this kind of stuff. Yes, Stan, you know that. And what happened? It happened that these ladies that they perfectly knew the processes left the company, and their knowledge was gone. Why? Because they didn't even document basic assumptions of the processes. So when we started to look into the development processes, I couldn't even answer which business processes are covered by the tool. It was so bad. Yes, so you have no clue, you have no control over development. You have no control about business as well, because you don't know which part of the business is supported by software, which are not. You don't know because you don't have the business processes identified. Yeah. And in this process, in this organization, unfortunately, we needed to build from scratch development practices, including what you mentioned, Sylvia, definition of done, definition of ready, covering also the documentation aspects, because it appeared that they have actually no documentation at all. The whole scope of the project was documented as an Excel file, including all the estimations and workload estimated by the team. So they needed to recreate at least some basic documentation. And it was done as definition of done for releases, not at the sprint level, for releases. Yeah? And coming back to your original question, Stan, what documentation I am using in my project, it really depends on the project. Yeah, what I'm doing in this project, improving the process or building backlog, and that's the end? Or am I going to provide software and maintain the software that will create different list of artifacts? And that's actually my starting point. I'm sitting with stakeholders, trying to understand what we want. And on that basis, when we know the goal, that, for example, our goal is to create the software, and to create the software, you also need to understand which processes will be covered. You are identifying artifacts. We need to create software. So we need just, for example, user stories and backlog and some risk analysis. That's often missing. And to understand requirements, we need to know which operation will be supported. So we need to have business process documentation. To have business process documentation, we need to identify stakeholders. And this way you are creating an artifact map to understand the full job that needs to be done. Sylvia said something that is really important. Documentation is a product. It's not something, that we are doing by accident as an addition to the real product, which is software. That's a separate product. And if you do not start treating documentation as a product, then unfortunately, I think that you will never understand which documentation you need to create, which documentation needs to be done as part of the final product.
Yeah, absolutely agree. This means so when talking about how much documentation is needed and what kind of documents are created, so it's always a question of what is the process, so the development process that is considered. What is the product built? So is this a known product? Is it something new in the market? And also on the, let's say, organizational settings, is everything built in-house, or do you also need, for instance, the requirements as a kind of contractual basis, what we already have discussed about? And here is another question popping up in the context of SAFe. And so Pavel is asking, let's assume we have scaled agile framework project where requirements are specified gradually in the user stories. Unfortunately, SAFe does not assume a BA role. Product owners don't have enough requirements engineering skills. Who, in your opinion, should drive the consolidated functional documentation?
Do we really need to have roles to have competency? Ensure that you have competency in the team. Problem solved. That's my opinion.
I agree, and I like your answer, because quite often people too much hide behind their existing roles and just telling, hey, this is not my job. This is only I'm a whatever UX guy. I'm a whatever guy. I don't have to care about ABC. And I think what's more needed nowadays, especially as long as our products are becoming more and more complex, on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, we need to reduce the complexity of products, because each and everyone should be able to operate these products. It's not only for the, let's say, experts who are operating these products. We need to be more open, and we need the skill set. And for me, it doesn't matter if this is called a product owner or whatever, a business manager, or in a release train engineer in SAFe. Someone needs to be there having the skill set to be able to fulfill these tasks. And I think this is pretty much required.
But that could also show some problems within the process and information management. That is my experience, that if you are wondering who should do some task or who should be in charge of something, then guys, to be honest, from my perspective, things like who should do thing should be agreed at the very, very beginning of the project. What are we going to deliver? Do we have sufficient skills? Do we have competency? Then we can decide who should do it. Maybe product owner should be upskilled. I don't know. Maybe a product owner is perfect if it comes about business domain, but have no skills and requirements in documentation. That's fair. For me, that's fair enough. Then you need to look for competencies in your team. And well, the problem is that for me, personal opinion, being agile also means that you have a team that have competency. If you have a team of programmers, then sorry, you are not agile. That's simple.
Yeah, exactly. You also need the competencies of understanding the needs, documenting the requirements, also, let's say, building the right architecture, because it's not only about implementing, especially if we not only talk about, let's say, just another app. Then I think also this skill set is needed. And yes, Pavel.
And if you treat also the documentation as a product and part of the product that you are building, then if you look at all the agile things, you will see that it is a shared responsibility. We are all responsible as a team to have this, right? So we should have all the skills, right?
Yeah, indeed.
That would be a great theory. In practice, I know your pain, Pavel. In practice, we have we don't have ideal world. So in practice, what I could recommend, if your product owner is okay with learning how to write requirements, okay, but consider if he will really deal with that, considering time pressure. Yeah. If your product owner is not able to do his job and creating requirements, then sorry, but you need to somehow outsource this task. To who? To development team. That's easy. Team is to support another members of the team. So for me, there is no other way. Maybe you can create something like an external business analysis team supporting product owners. It's not working. At least I've never seen it's working. So you can try like this. But for sure, well, someone needs to do this job.
That's true. That's the point. This leads me a bit into this point we wanted also to address: documentation as a kind of communication, because for sure we document, but this does not mean that we do not talk to each other anymore. It's even more that we need to talk to each other. So asking the two of you, how is your view on, let's say, how documentation can support the communication within the project team and for stakeholder alignment? What do you think?
So for sure it is to support the communication, to support the onboarding, because you can then refer back to something that is documented. And we need also to remember about the way that we document, because what Carolina started to say is that she creates different kind of documentation, from process to requirements, to analysis of risks, and so on. And this is very important when you look at, for example, this onboarding stuff. When you are new to the project, first you need to have high abstract documentation, and then you need to go deeper and deeper into more details about the project. So then you can look at the requirements, then you look, when you are aware of that, then about the process first, then the requirements, then the architectural decisions, then maybe the tests, then maybe if you go into the level of documentation, the technical stuff, and so on. So this is the kind of also important thing to remember, that we have like different abstraction level of the documentation with different purposes for this. So this is one aspect for this. And the other aspect that also is very important, that came into my mind when Karina was answering the previous question, is about the traceability, that none of the documentation is just, the product itself, but they should like follow each other. So you have the abstractions, but also decision made and documented on different levels of the documentation should follow the next level. So if you have a process and then you decided, okay, so this step in our process we will support with a software, then you need to document the software. Then you have the requirements for the software that should follow from the process that Carolina mentioned, that when you don't have this rationale in the process, then the software starts to be something that is neglected, that is not accepted by customers, and so on. When you have the requirements, from the requirements you should follow the architectural decision, then the part of code. And this is the traceability that is very, very important to maintain it, not only the documentation, but also to see what is the trace from the app to the bottom, to every line of your source code, every line of your test. And then you can go up and see, why am I doing it? Why am I implementing that? Oh, because my client wanted that requirement. So this function is really of value to implement. So those were two aspects that I wanted also to mention. When you are creating a documentation, really think about those two ideas.
I would like to add something to that. I'm laughing because traceability also help you to understand that the function that you are implementing is actually is needless.
Yeah.
No one needs it. Yeah, there is no business need to prove it. So yeah, and that's also a great application of documentation and traceability to understand what is really needed, where you have the value, and what you are doing just because someone asked and cannot understand why he asked. Yeah, so that's one point. And another thing. Impact analysis. Yeah, we are creating software, then we are maintaining software, and without proper links between different artifacts like requirements and code, you will never know what will be effect of your change. And we have a lot of examples. Yeah, people change one point, one place in the software, they broke everything. Why? Because probably some relationships were not understood. And that's the value of documentation, not creating user stories with the respect of for user stories.
Yeah. Good point. Maybe coming to another point, because I think it's quite good, is fitting to the idea of handling requirements or requirements documents or backlogs, whatever, as a kind of product that is created. Because when you're having a product, you often talk about quality criteria for those products. And I think this is also valid for requirements artifacts, could be single requirements, but also for, let's say, the complete documents. This could be whole documents, this could be a backlog, doesn't matter in which, let's say, way you are working. So what do you think, what are the most important quality criteria, or Carolina, which kind of quality criteria do you use? And we already heard some, let's say, at least ideas of from Sylvia also in the very beginning.
You know, I think that we all know that there are really plenty of quality criteria, and to be honest, there is no sense and no possibility to implement all of them in one project. So I will not even discuss this option. For me, I think in all of my projects, things that needs to be well ensured, if you are talking about any kind of documentation, I believe, is it must be measurable and unambiguous.
Measurable means that you can
The
say
other
that these requirements have been fulfilled or not. Yeah, okay.
Yes, because if something is not measurable, for me, it will never be understood because you don't know what is the expected outcome. Yes, so you will not implement, you will not test, you will have problems on UAT testing. Yeah, you will have problems on production because we don't know what we are doing and what is the supposed outcome. So measurability, and I'm not talking about non-functional requirements right now. I'm also talking about functions. Yeah, in theory, functions are absolutely clear and simple, right? Either the system is doing something or not, but it's not as easy. The system can do a function in this way or this way, generating this output or this output, and we need to specify this, which leads to another story that I think Sylvia is a really expert in that. Quality criteria is a kind of acceptance criteria for a given function. That's one point. Another point, data. Yeah. When we are talking about functionality, functions are working on data. You need to specify data, and otherwise you don't really know how the function is working. Imagine a very simple function of login. Which data you are processing? If you don't understand it, that's specified, then this function is just, this requirement will be specified in poor way. That's my approach.
Yeah, great. Sylvia, anything from your side?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Carolina said. There are also some standards that say that about the completeness. That is also the kind quality criteria. But of course, this is something that is very difficult to assure. But we should at least try to assure the completeness. So if we document, we should document it completely. I would say also, what I personally don't like in documentation, what it is missing, when it is not consistent, or when it does not, somebody writes it but documents it, but without taking care of that. And it is hard because it is product, so we take care about nice graphical user interface for software, but also when you when you create your document, it should also look like and be usable for the reader. So you should think about, like, you are the reader of the documentation and you are creating it from this perspective. So it should be easy to search, easy to find things, consistent, and written in a nice way, or the diagrams should be clear or described or something like that. So that it is not treated like something that is not needed for that. And I would say also it depends on the project, the level of the documentation, and the qualities, because sometimes for safety critical systems you have really high standards for documentation, and you should put many really information that follow from standards itself about hazard analysis and so on. For, I would say, not such risky systems, you can look into your experience, some standards that are not as demanding and as those for those high risk systems.
Yeah, that's true. That's great. Looking to the time, so we have 4 minutes to go. Maybe one last question from my side also to you. So we have talked a lot about the rationale of documentation, that also about business continuity and so on. So we did not address really the aspect of tools, but I think it's not super important because it depends very much on the organization what kind of tools are used. But I would like to ask the ever asked question in nowadays, since the last 12 months, how can AI help in this area? Or do you use AI to support yourself in documenting?
Would you like to start, Sylvia?
Okay, I can start. So, like, starting from the bottom. So from the bottom, you have many tools that you can integrate, like from the source code. You can integrate with your development environment, and then help you write the documents, help you write the comments for those. Let me just mention Copilot, or from Amazon, those Whisper and so on. So those are the tools for sure that can help for the code. Then there are the tools also that can help you with documenting your code when you treat tests as your documents. So also with generating the tests, it can different LLMs can help you with that. For requirements, then if you go to the standard tools that you use for documentation, if you go for the Atlassian and like different other tools, or IBM and so on, and now those companies, then they are now in the race of supporting us with AI agents that they are doing, and this is the way to try out if those agents can help you. But for sure, what I've experienced in helping AI in generating, like using LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and so on. So to me, what proved useful was to generate and check the completeness of requirements that I initially generated, or that I initially written for some software. So this is the kind of idea. I think those LLMs proved also useful for non-functional requirements, especially for security requirements. They are really good for generating the security threats and some mitigation strategies for having that. I think this is kind of idea for generating different responses to requirements from stakeholders. So for example, you are proposing a new requirement and they can somehow tell you, like talking to your user, what could a user say about that? Of course, we have to take into account that they are not perfect. This is something to support you. So in elicitation, they help in also verifying the requirements, and I would say they also help in taking notes. So there are many tools like Zoom, Teams, and so on that they have now they do the summary of the meetings. Those summaries are not perfect, and I have a lot of requirements for them to improve their tools. However, I think they have good ability to summarize, to have the points. And when you are, always eliciting or discussing with your customer, with your users about requirements, it's quite difficult to take notes. Also, it is difficult to record, and not always people agree to have a recorded sessions. So they are a good point to have this
Great.
This way. At least those I have tried.
Carolina, anything to add? What are you using in your daily business?
My opinion is that tools are good, but these are just tools. Without thinking, no tool will help you. And that's it. Yeah, you can use tools in many applications, like Sylvia said, but if you don't know, again, what you want to achieve, a tool will not help.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thanks a lot. The time was running, so we have already reached the end of the hour. I'm happy to have this really great discussion with you. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. So recordings will be available directly after the session. Maybe let us announce 2 points also interesting for the community in Poland. One aspect is so we have a kind of meetup in Warsaw on October 16th, what's planned. If you are interested, just have a look on the community. So on the IREB website, you will find anything about this event in short notice. You can directly save this date. So it's on October 16th in the evening. It's an on-site meetup. If you're interested, sign up for the community. And there's another one. There is a great conference taking place next year in Poland. Sylvia, just words on this.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to invite everybody to the conference, to the 32nd edition of the Requirements Engineering Conference, RESCUE 2026 will take place in Poznań, in Poland, at Poznań University of Technology. So we are hosting the 32nd edition. This is first time they are in Poland, and we are proud and happy of that. We hope there would be nice discussions about the recent developments in requirements engineering. People will share their work, their experience. Usually people from over 20 countries come to such conference. So it is a good point to exchange knowledge and to listen to others. So I would like to sincerely invite you to this conference. There would be different forms that you can participate. You can participate as a workshop participant. You can listen to scientific presentation. You can listen to industry speakers. So a lot of is coming 23rd of May. So please note it down. IREB is supporting us, so for sure it will also raise the quality and assure the quality. So please come and join the requirements engineering community that is eager to exchange knowledge in March.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you all who have attended. So I would like to have this kind of vivid community, also meeting you in person. Doesn't matter if it's in Warsaw or at the conference. And I think there will be additional events next year on site. So stay tuned, and thank you and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye.